I want to make one comment before I start presenting. This is by no means a presentation of any results of a completed research. This is very much work in progress. So I am not going to present any strictly formulated research question. I am not going to present any theoretical framework and any methodology. I'm just raising some questions. How important the knowledge of foreign languages was in the Old Norse world. Then I will ask, how did people in Saga age learn foreign languages and how did they communicate? And I can tell you at once that the answer to the last question, how did they communicate? I mean, Scandinavian Vikings, let's say this that simple, with people speaking other languages. The answer is very simple. I don't know. But it's still legitimate to ask the question and to raise some hypotheses, which I'm going to do during my talk. And well, one more comment. I will not use time discussing different types of sources I use. I mainly use saga literature, but sagas are not all the same. There are different groups of sagas, different genres of sagas, but I simply don't think I have the time to discuss such differences. So the importance of foreign language knowledge was not only a matter in the saga texts. One very famous author, Marianne Kalinke, published 40 years ago an article about the importance of foreign language knowledge in what she calls Icelandic romance. That's one of the groups of the sagas. They're also known as indigenous chivalric sagas. But also in real life, not only in the lives of the heroes of those sagas, but also in real life, knowledge of foreign languages was indeed very important, as witnessed, among other sources, by a text called Konungs Skuggsjá, King's Mirror, Speculum Royale, where the father tells his son, oh my God, I should definitely have included an English translation, sorry. But he says, ef þú vilt verða fullkommen í fróðleik, så nemndu allar mállýtskur en allra helst latinu og hvalsku, så þær tungur ganga víðast. And if you want to become perfect in wisdom, learn all languages, and first of all, Latin and French. Hvalsku means French. Because these languages, these tongues, go widest, that is, they're broadest used and have the highest currency, so to speak. And so, but make sure you don't don't forget your own language. Wonderful. And I only have a screenshot from this part from the manuscript. You can find a facsimile of the manuscript online. It's digitized. It's quite beautiful. Not very impressive, but it contains some, colorful initial letters. And if we had more time, I would play a YouTube video for you where a professor from Oslo University, well, he is now a retired professor, Professor Emeritus, reads the text in reconstructed Old Norse pronunciation. And there are two persons, the father and the son. So the same person plays both roles. The name of this professor is Arne Torp. Maybe someone knows him. Well, of course, he's first and foremost a professor, a researcher, but he's also a good actor. So it is a pleasure to watch him do role play. And his daughter is one of the most famous Norwegian actresses. Okay, to quote a little bit from the article by Marianne Kalinke, which already is 40 years old, as I mentioned before, you find examples in the text that she researched or focused on, those indigenous chivalric sagas or Icelandic romances, and she mentions some persons in those sagas who were fluent in all the languages spoken in the world. Who speak all the languages of the world and who never need an interpreter. And her conclusion is, one can only conclude that fluency in foreign languages is perceived in Icelandic romance as the mark both of the learned man and of the ideal hero. Then a much more recent publication, a master thesis defended at the University of Iceland, Háskóli Íslands. The author of this thesis looked at different groups or kinds of sagas, among other Íslendingasögur, sagas of Icelanders and Fornaldarsögur, sagas of ancient times. And she observed that the rare characters who display language skills become particular leaders within the community, even if they do not become kings. Unlike in the indigenous Riddarasögur, that is the kind of sagas that Marianne Kalinke discusses in her article, there does not appear to be a foreign language requirement in these genres. Either sagas do not mention languages at all, especially the sagas of Icelanders, which rarely report journeys outside of the Nordic sphere. But we do have some counter examples, which I'm going to show you. Or as with the French romances, characters can travel widely without being hindered by language barriers. In the fictional world, for the most part, mutual intelligibility is assured. For example, Haraldur Hardraði, the half-brother of the Saint Olaf, Rex Perpetuum Norvegiae, travels through over 15 countries in Asia, Africa, and Europe without any reference to language borders. Presumably, the historical Harald could communicate in a language other than Norse. His extensive stays with the Varangian Guard would imply a degree of linguistic ability. But this saga is not interested in this skill. And I can tell you more. Human people, can also communicate with mythological beings with no language barriers at all. So to the first question, which I formulated on the first slide, how did they learn foreign languages? In certain cases, they had formal education, either with a personal tutor or attended institutionalized educational institutions where they learned, among other things, also foreign languages. And there may well have been other ways to learn a foreign language. In Volsunga saga, which is one of the sagas of ancient times, Fornaldarsögur. Here you have the text in Old Norse in normalized orthography, but I have also a screenshot from a diplomataric or non-normalized edition. Here it says, Sigurd, that is the main hero's foster father, was a man named Regin, son of Hreidmar. He taught the boy sports, chess, runes, and how to speak many languages, skills deemed proper for king's sons at that time, and many other things as well. So a personal tutor. Of course, Sigurd is not a historical character. And Regin, this saga doesn't tell explicitly that he was a mythological being or a supernatural being, but I think it is quite clear between the lines that Regin is not human, or at least not entirely human. He has two brothers, one of whom can turn into an otter, and the other can turn and does turn into a dragon. Sigurd, the main hero, kills the dragon and is known as Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. But nevertheless, I think that this short example does reflect some reality, namely that being able to speak many languages was a skill deemed proper for king's sons. We have also more real life documentation showing that people did study foreign languages, not only with a personal tutor as Sigurd, but also attending organized courses. In the Chronica Slavorum, it mentions that the Danish nobility of the 12th century sent their sons to Paris to be liberally educated and to acquire French. At the same time, the non-aristocratic majority of the North were monolingual, according to this article at least, but I am going to raise some serious doubts and questions about whether the non-aristocratic majority indeed exclusively was monolingual. Yeah, by the way, you can also ask this question just by looking at this quotation. The Norwegian king, Håkon Håkonsson, or Haukon Haukonarsson in Icelandic pronunciation, he says that he cannot participate in organizing a crusade because his countrymen do not know foreign languages. And in his reply, the Pope suggests that it would be appropriate for the king to wage war on his heathen neighbors instead of undertaking a crusade that may prove a hardship to the Norwegians for the threefold reason of their poverty, the great distances involved, and their ignorantia linguarum interrecentium. But their ignorance of other languages is not a problem with regard to their heathen neighbors. And who are those heathen neighbors? Well, it doesn't say explicitly. I believe they're mainly the Sami population. Once when I talked about a similar topic at a different conference, one person asked me, perhaps they were the Balts on the other side of the Baltic Sea. I think Sami is the most plausible guess. Okay, were there any other ways of language learning and or acquisition? Self-study, perhaps? Some of those fictional characters who are told to have been able to speak all the languages in the world, most probably they were supposed to have learned those languages by studying them themselves. I think so. But more close to the real life situations, natural or spontaneous language acquisition in a society where contacts with people speaking other languages are frequent, that is folk plurilingualism, I believe was a part of reality, especially for those Scandinavians, Norwegians, and Swedes who had contacts with the Sami-speaking society. Yeah. How did they communicate? And now I am focusing more and more on the communication between the Norwegians and the Sami. Mutual intelligibility? No, of course not between the Norwegian-speaking community and the Sami-speaking community. The languages are completely different. In some other cases, in some other situations, mutual intelligibility may have been how they communicated. Receptive bilingualism, using a lingua franca, using interpreters, having bilingual competence, polyglot or plurilingual communication, including accommodation, which we talked about yesterday. And it was after yesterday's discussion with Christian that I added 2 words, including accommodation, to my PowerPoint. Perhaps a creoloid or a pidgin-like variety. Receptive bilingualism was very likely in communication between Scandinavians and English-speaking people. For example, Scandinavian Vikings serving at the court of the English king. I mean, Old English and Old Norse were similar enough that with a certain amount of effort and goodwill, it was possible to communicate in each party's own language. But of course, receptive bilingualism wouldn't have helped to communicate with the Sami-speaking population. Well, I have found at least one example explicitly describing use of interpreters in a 14th century text, which is not a saga, a different type of text. It says that each side, that is both Norwegians and the Sami, had their own interpreter, because the Sami, who live in the outermost part of Finland, all the way north by Gandvik, they are utterly heathen and speak a language different from the one we Norwegians speak. Then I found a very fun example in a saga, Arrow Odds saga, where 2 Norwegian Vikings, when they are on a raid in Bjarmaland, which usually is identified with Permia, the one Viking says, "Can you make out anything of what the people are saying here?" "No more than birds twittering." I love this quotation because, in different languages, when you describe a language you don't understand, you use different metaphors. In English, you say, "It's all Greek for me." Yeah. In Lithuanian, which is my own native language, we say, "This is birds' speech to me." So I love this quotation. Mm-hmm. So what they did, they realized that one person among those Yarmians most probably was a Norwegian, which was kept in captivity as a slave. So they captured him and used him as an informer. Then, of course, you have episodes in saga literature which explicitly mentions there being no need for an interpreter. For example, don't you have an English translation? No, I don't think I have an English translation. In Knytlinga saga, the saga of the descendants of Knut, one person of Zambian origin, he was from Zambia, roughly present-day Kaliningrad. It says that he Kunimargar Tungur knew many languages, knew many tongues, and and he didn't need an interpreter. But the very fact that you mention that someone doesn't need an interpreter implies that using an interpreter must have been a thing. And then you have many episodes in the saga literature involving both Norwegians and Sami without even ever raising the question of how they communicated. One of the most famous Norwegian kings, Harald Fairhair, the one who unified Norway, he was, among other women, married to a Sami girl named Snøfrid. So how did they communicate? They must have communicated somehow, right? Back to the list I have. Was Snøfrid perfectly bilingual? Maybe she was, I don't know. Could Harald himself understand some Sami? Maybe he could, I don't know. Did they speak a mix of all the languages and, you know, with some help of support of body language? Perhaps. Also, in some laws, the Norwegian Christians were forbidden to have contact with Finnar, who are not Finns, but the Sami. Go to them to ask for prophecies or for medical help. So if a law forbids doing something, what does it imply? That such things happened. So Norwegians must have communicated with Finnar, that is the Sami. Yeah, some texts, especially Norwegian texts, give a picture of Samis and Sami life, which reveals an intimate first-hand knowledge. So at least some Norwegians did communicate with some Sami. And then we could discuss what being plurilingual actually means. Being plurilingual is not a matter of yes or no. You can be plurilingual in more ways than one and to varying degree. You can have different kind of skills, communicative versus formal, receptive versus productive, oral versus written skills. You can use different languages, you know, to a different degree in different domains, in different communication situations, with regard to who your conversation partner is, and so on. You can have different kinds of communication, ranging from speech in a monolingual mode, one language only, to changing language choices, one language at a time, to code switching, all languages at the same time. And in fact, I'm quoting from Lyde, in fact, the more we move towards an extreme plurilingual mode, the more the borders between the languages begin to blur. And the notion of code, in the sense of a shared set of conventions, as the structuralists defined it, does not really make sense anymore. Yeah, which leads us either to avoid the term code or to admit that there could be plurilingual codes. So perhaps in communication between the Norwegian-speaking Vikings and the Sami-speaking members of society, perhaps they used a plurilingual code. And yeah, importantly, translinguistic formulations are simultaneously a powerful communicative strategy and a potential learning tool. So you do not only study languages in order to be able to communicate, but also you learn languages by communicating, learning by doing. Perhaps that's how they learned each other's languages. Classen wrote that the silence in many literary texts regarding multilingual conditions probably reveals more about the lower hurdles which foreign languages represented at the time than any explicit discussion of linguistic issues. But nevertheless, I think it is both interesting and important to raise questions like how they learned, how they acquired languages, and how they communicated. Because just saying lower hurdles with foreign languages, lower hurdles which foreign languages represented, okay, but still, it's interesting how they learned each other languages and how they communicated. So I think my discussion still is valid and relevant. And finally, I would to conclude my presentation with providing 2 episodes where I think it's highly unlikely that the described events involving knowledge of foreign languages could actually have taken place in reality. I think that the described events are pure fiction and serve literary purposes. Now, for example, some episodes where Curonians, that is people from Kurland in present-day Latvia and partly Lithuania, say something important. In Egil's saga, Egil, the main protagonist of the saga, is captured when he's on a Viking raid in Kurland. He's captured by the local Curonian farmers, and the farmer's son says, since night has fallen, it is too dark to get much fun out of torturing them, that is, those Norwegian Vikings. It would be best to wait till morning. Who understood what he said in his Curonian language? And more importantly, who heard him speaking when Egil and his company were already imprisoned in a different building? I think this is pure fiction, and its function is to show that Curonians were bad guys as well. Egil is definitely not an unambiguously good guy. He's a very complex personality. He's in very many situations bad, but nevertheless, he's not entirely bad. And how do you show that he was not entirely bad? You show that the other people were also bad. And another example from Knytlinga Saga, which I already have quoted from today. Now, some Kurlanders are on a Viking raid. They were Vikings as well, on a Viking raid in a place that sometimes belonged to Sweden, sometimes to Denmark. And then these Curonians, or Kurs, as it says in this translation, realized that troops were heading towards them. They hauled their ships ashore and prepared to make a stand there. They thought these were Swedes, but an old man amongst the Kurs said they were Danes. And it is not a good idea to wait, he said. At that, he rowed off in his ship, but the rest of the Kurs stayed behind with 9 ships. Then Christophorus and his companions came with all their men and immediately began to attack. All the Kurs were killed there, and not even a single child escaped, while only 2 of the Danes were killed. Then the Danes took their ships and goods and brought them home, having won a great victory. Okay, again, who understood? And more importantly, who reported what this old man had said when all the Kurs were killed, except him, except the old man? Again, I think this is pure fiction. And as Christel Silmer wrote in her doctoral thesis and then in subsequent publications based on such focus upon the superiority of the Danes is a common motive in Knytlinga Saga. And this technique adds illustrative details to the description of battles, rather than actually reporting people understanding Curonian language. Yeah, to sum up, having studied foreign languages and being able to speak foreign languages, elite plurilingualism is not simply or not only considered positive in Old Norse sources, it is an attribute of both kings and heroes. Communication between the speakers of Northern Germanic and Finno-Ugric languages is usually not commented upon, except for the one episode where the 2 parties are said to have needed an interpreter. It seems that in that particular case, the linguistic barrier is also a sign of the more fundamental distinction, us versus the other. Effective communication between some speakers of North Germanic and Finno-Ugric languages must have been a reality. We don't know exactly how they communicated, but we can raise some questions and hypotheses. And Finally, some episodes involving use of foreign languages in saga literature are pure fiction. Okay, thanks for listening to me.